Sorry? Take your seat. Take your seat. We'll be clapping. I've got a story about those. Yes. Ennis was great. The cat was in here earlier, I don't know. Yeah. And we got a doggy as well. Yeah. And Sunflower. And Ted. And then obviously, you're not going to burst out to tears all the time. It's nice that he's got all this
couple of people I know and trust,
That's good. Shall we look?
I think we shall.
Good morning! Good morning! Yes! If ever I have another idea like this, would you please just slap me? Alright? I woke up this morning and thought, oh good God, what have I done? But we're here, and it's too late to backtrack now. So thank you for coming today to the first of, I'm sure, will be a repeated event in the future, our rally on This is Spiritualism. We have a lineup of wonderful guests and speakers today. The programme is, we will be starting off shortly with talk on the history of spiritualism. We've had a few changes in our running order. Unfortunately, this is a sign of today's world. We can't guarantee anybody being anywhere at a certain time anymore. So, lovely Elaine Bevin. Elaine, I know you're watching at home. Get better soon, sweetie. Elaine very kindly sent through her notes of her talk. She put it through me so I could vet it, and I went, don't be silly, just say what you like. Well, I wish I'd vetted it now, but never mind, we'll find out in a minute. Simon has very kindly stepped in to be Elaine today, so for the next half hour, this is Elaine. The idea is with the talks, all our speakers will be giving a talk for 25 minutes, half an hour, 35 minutes, around about that area. Time for questions. Questions are really, really important. If you do not, or if you don't understand something, this is your golden opportunity to ask questions. We have got some fabulously, no, that's the wrong word. I think I said well endowed. Well versed. I don't know. I never looked. I never looked, Glenn. I went like that. Well versed practitioners of spiritualism. There is so much knowledge in this room today. Utilise it, because it's there for you to use. You are not a spectator. You are a participant. And today's energies and today's direction of the talks and the questions and the answers is generated by your presence. So, we will kick off when I've finished rambling on, very shortly with the lovely Simon, with a talk on the history of spiritualism. 12 o'clock, we have the wonderful Brian Walker. Where are you, Brian? There you go. Brian will be talking about healing within our movement. 1 o'clock, we've got a short break for lunch. Thank you, everybody who's pre-ordered their meals. That will save huge queues and everything. So just at 1 o'clock, all the Yeah, I'm getting the thumbs up. They're all ready. Just pick them up. Utilise the seating outside because it will not be raining. I have had a word. 1:30 we resume with the wonderful Leonard Tapp, who is our guest for this weekend. Did a wonderful demonstration last night, and we'll be taking a point, or has fully booked for tomorrow for spiritual assessments. I am such in awe of Len's knowledge. I seriously am. I just clam up when Len's about because he knows everything. And yeah. please don't, Len. 2:30 we have science and spiritualism with lovely Stephen at the back there. 3:30 change in the programme here. Bill Rich had a COVID jab, thank you, and he's had an adverse reaction to it, so he's not travelling down. So you've got some mush called Lawrence Saville, all right, stepping in. One of my passions, the purpose of the evidential mediumship and its place within spiritualism. And then at 4:30, who better to hear from than Spirit themselves? You all know Mark Stone. Mark will be giving a short trance address from Spirit, again with the opportunity to ask questions. So absolutely fabulous lineup. This evening we have a demonstration of mediumship from Mark Stone, Stephen Mager, Leonard Tapp, and I'll be standing in for Bill's absence. So 1 out of 3 is a bit wobbly, but the other 3 will be fine. I'm sure they'll rescue him. Without further ado though, if we could ask, just join in for this moment, join in for this time. Hello darling. That's all right. You stand outside, I'll take notes later. Divine and infinite Spirit, that whom we know as God, we ask your blessing, your presence, your love, and that encompassing gift from the spirit world today, for this special day, for this day of learning, for progression, for understanding, for coming together, for building up those relationships, both here in the physical and there in the virtual world. And we know that this day will flow. The energies are here, they're strong, they're vibrant. We know that the blessings are upon this day and all that is to be achieved and will be achieved in the future. So we lay this day open now to that everlasting font of all love that flows from the very centre of creation. And we know, dear Lord, that today will be a day remembered, and remembered for the right reasons. Amen.
Amen.
So, I will hand over now to the lovely Elaine.
Yes, the lovely Elaine. I said to Elaine that I would channel Elaine today. So, here we go.
Well, that's Simon Dam then. Yeah. She will be coming back, you know, one way or the other, I'll tell you.
Well, I said to her that I was going to put a wig on and a dress, but she said, well, anything that makes people laugh.
Yeah, it's a normal Saturday.
Yeah, normal Saturday. Shopping. And whoever bought these sunflowers, they're beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, they're lovely. There was a story, back in the 80s, the oldest living person then was a lady in France, in Arles, in the south of France. And she was 118, I think, when she finally left us. And she was interviewed by Sue Lawley, and she looked immaculate and amazing. And of course, it's this amazing national treasure. Thank you. Good critic already. And she said to I think her name was Florence something or other, and she said, Madame, how have you managed to live to 118 years old? And your complexion, you have no wrinkles. And then she went, ah, Miss Lawley, I do have wrinkles, I'm just sitting on them. So, Start the energy with a good laugh.
Yeah.
Right, how we doing?
Someone's gone off beat already.
Yeah,
Okay.
off piece.
Only another 12 hours.
Hours to go. So, the history of spiritualism. When we talk of the history of spiritualism, we are generally referring to the religion of modern spiritualism, rather than the science, philosophy, and phenomena. But I want to take you much further back in time, before it became a religion, when it was simply a way of life. So we're going to take a light-hearted journey through that history. So, ancient oracles and seers.
Carry on.
Lamide was the son of the god Apollo, who was the god of oracles. This is about 3000 CE. And he was a member of a clan of hereditary soothsayers that lived in Olympia. And I always think that we have a soothsayer over here, namely Lawrence. Asclepius, the healing god, dreamt of the treatments of gods prescribed for each of his patients, and his healing sanctuary and treatments continued until well into the Christian era. Perhaps an earlier incarnation of Harry Edwards. Roman augurs and oracles actually formed a committee called a collegium, which eventually had 16 members. Their job was to observe signs such as the behavior of a group of sacred chickens, cluck, the path of flights of birds, and interpret them for the people. Another sort of example of an ancient form of Stansted Hall. Stansted Hall is the College for Psychic Sciences. The oracles of Zeus' first temple was an oak tree that grew on sacred land. A written question would be submitted to the priest, who would then interpret the rustle of the leaves to provide an answer for the inquirer. And for this case, with this church, if we're going to do that, then Elaine suggests we get a bigger basket to take around for the collection. Here we go. I've got to get this word right. Pythia was the oracle of Apollo at Delphi. One day a month, she would fall into a trance-like state and utter prophetic words. It is interesting to note that she would prepare herself for her trance state by washing and purifying herself, the way mediums today still use a process of attunement to prepare themselves to link with spirit. And if any of the people here who are giving demonstrations want to be washed down, we can get a hose and a yard broom for you to purify you before or after you come on stage. Sibyls, or prophetesses, legend has it that the Sibyl predated the god Apollo at Delphi and would sit on a rock and prophesy in a state of ecstasy. Ultimately, there were 10 wandering Sibyls whose prophecies were actually recorded in books, and the last recording being of a message given to a representative of the Emperor Julian, 361 to 363 BCE. And again, Lawrence, the lady here who wrote this says that sometimes when we look at you, you look in ecstasy like the Sibyls.
Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you, Elaine. Nearer to home, in the UK, Druids were priests of the Celtic tribes and were known to be seers and diviners, although no evidence of specific messages remain. They also sometimes held political power as advisors to the rulers of the day. How about Laurie becoming Prime Minister? What do you reckon? Many cultures, belief systems, indigenous peoples and tribes around the world used seers, sages and shaman for the guidance of their tribes or people to steer them through difficult and traumatic times. Hippocrates, the ancient Greek physician, 460 BC, 376 5 BC, was known as the father of medicine, was known as an excellent doctor with a keen scientific mind, and is quoted as saying, "The affections suffered by the body, the soul sees with shut eyes." And maybe that's still a thing these days with various forms of clairvoyance. Moving on, so we come to the birth of modern spiritualism. Favourite guy of mine, if people will recognise this guy's name, Emanuel Swedenborg, 1688 to 1772. Was a Swedish mining engineer, and despite being brought up in the Lutheran faith, he experienced psychic events from childhood that culminated in clairvoyance in his mid-50s. So there's a chance for me now. He was able to give a clear explanation of the process of death and of the world beyond that, and that was not based on any religious standpoint. And if he came today, I'm sure this church would be packed to the rafters with Mr. Swedenborg. Then we come to a gentleman called Edward Irving, born in 1792 in Scotland. You can be here for Scotland. Was brought up in the strict Scottish Protestant faith and became a pastor in a small Scottish church in London. In the churches, they started to experience speaking in tongues. At first, this was unintelligible, a bit like me now. Sounds which some felt were very similar to chants. Then, gradually, they became prayers and then sermons. They were obviously psychic events, but were restricted by the dogma of the narrow sectarian religion at that moment. And there are still parts of the world where that type of dogma and restrictions exist. Then members of the Shaker Society emigrated to America in the 1780s and established 60 societies there, which by the 1830s saw an outbreak of psychic events and spirit possession in these communities. They were mostly, and I found this interesting, they were mostly Native American Indian spirit beings, and these events continued for 7 years and were recorded. The records, it stated that the new era of events would also be preceded by the discovery of great mineral wealth. Well, a short time later, the massive Californian gold fields were discovered, which started the famous gold rush, and then the Hydesville rappings occurred in 1848. And Laurie, this will verify that some churches used to write down the messages from the mediums and give the notes to the recipients at the end of the service. Taking note there?
We don't, we record it now.
That's true. They record it, Elaine.
Yeah, get with it, Elaine.
Yeah. Prior to the Hydesville rappings, it is recorded that the rappings had previously occurred in buildings in Oppenheim, Germany in 1520, in Tedworth in the UK in 1661, and then in Epworth Vicarage, UK in 1760. Andrew Jackson Davis, 1826 to 1910, born in New York to an uneducated mother who had experienced visions throughout her life. His physic abilities developed during childhood, and he experienced clairaudience and clairvoyance and clairrayner. Sorry, that was my turn. But his full potential only came to light when a local tailor who practiced mesmerism devoted his time and energy to working with him. Davis became known as the Poughkeepsie Seer and developed his clairvoyant powers for a diagnosis of diseases, and described how the human body became transparent before his spirit eyes. Each organ was seen clearly with a radiance of its own, which was dimmed when disease was present in the organ. He could also leave his body whilst in trance to visit those in need of his help. Davis was able to describe the process of dying by watching the soul leave the body and the separation of the silver cord that connected the body and soul. He saw the departed soul being met by family and loved ones before appearing to walk off into thin air. Davis also prophesied the coming of the motor car, the typewriter, as well as the coming of spiritualism. On the 31st of March, 1848, he stated that about daylight this morning, a warm breathing passed over my face, and I heard a voice, tender and strong, saying, "Brother, the good work has begun. Behold, a living demonstration is born." And I was left wondering what could be meant by such a message, if only modern mediums were as clear when going to give information today, Lawrence. Thank you. There's always somebody that can't resist doing that. I know it was in the film Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Right, one more time, I love it. Thank you. The Hydesville rapping started in 1848 in the home of the Fox family in New York State. They had already been recorded incidents in the house under previous tenants involving footsteps, knocking and rapping sounds from 1844 onwards. However, in March 1848, two of the daughters, Margaret and Kate, challenged the spirit, who they had named Mr. Splitfoot, to imitate the sound of their clicking fingers, which it managed to do exactly. Kate then snapped her fingers without making a sound, and the rappings also matched the number of times she did this silently. The mother then asked a series of numerical questions about dates and peoples, which it answered correctly. These events were observed by over 300 people in total during this period. Finally, on the 31st of March 1848, the spirit identified himself as a peddler named Charles B. Rosner, who was murdered by a previous tenant and buried in the cellar of the house. This fact was eventually confirmed 56 years later when human hair and bones were discovered in the cellar along with the peddler's tin box. The house and tin box now reside at the Lilldale headquarters of the NSAC in New York. NSAC?
National Spiritualist Association
Oh,
America.
America.
Oh, yeah, that'd be the A.
Yeah. Many scientists and professional researchers undertook studies of mediums during this time to prove that it was all false. However, many ended up becoming ardent spiritualists, much to their surprise when presented with unshakable personal evidence that they had seen. So since that time, there have been numerous gifted physical and mental mediums and healers, mainly in the US and the UK. However, a form known as Spiritism, which is a branch of spiritualism, was established in France in the 1850s by the French teacher Hippolyte Rivail under the pen name Allan Kardec. Kardec's works are the result of the study of mediumistic phenomena, and by questioning several mediums in trance on a variety of matters, he compiled, compared, and synthesized the answers obtained from spirits into a book of knowledge that speaks of the constant need to investigate the world around us, science, to make sense of our findings, philosophy, and to apply them to our day-to-day living so as to improve ourselves and the world around us. Religion. This approach is often referred to as the triple aspect of Spiritism, the conjoining of science, philosophy, and religion. It postulates that humans, along with all other living beings, are essentially immortal spirits that temporarily inhabit physical bodies for several necessary incarnations to attain moral and intellectual improvement. And Lawrence, I wonder what the spirit world would think of our efforts so far today. And so our trips through history have come to an end, and Thank you, Elaine. And there are now questions, I understand,
Thank you.
which I can't answer. Thank you.
It's like a tag relay. Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Elaine, for your lovely talk. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're opening up for questions. I know we're only first moment of the day, but are there any questions to do with things to do with the history of spiritualism, or just in general, that you've got questions at this moment? There may be things that we'll come on to later. So if there's things about healing, lovely Brian will be dealing with that. If there's things about the science, Stephen will be dealing, Len and the philosophy. But are there any questions at this point, or from what's been talked about in Elaine's speech?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
With the patches of how it goes back into the history, where does the Native American come into it?
Every single, and what was lovely about Elaine's speech talk there, every single tradition throughout the world, every tradition has contact with the other world by their own means. So therefore, we talk about the spirit in different ways. We talk about nature in different ways. But when you actually boil everything down, we always talk about the spirit, the divine, the essence that's within all. And so when we think of Native American traditions and that closeness to the land, that everything is kind of in harmony and taught in harmony, you'll see that replicated in other areas as well, not just with the Native American tradition in America, but in other areas as well. So when you boil it down, even in what we would think of Orthodox traditions, there were mediumistic experiences and phenomena. So in Native America, you often will find that there is histories of materializations and healings and things, very much so. Because again, there's a tradition of sitting together. You know, wherever you look about spiritualism or in other areas, when people come together and sit and open to that greater power, however they define it, the power of the Spirit will work through them. The hand of the Spirit can be seen. And this is where, when we talk about spiritualism, it's a way of viewing the world. And the spirit world says, your spiritualism, to us, that you created an ism around spirit contact. But actually what we should be as spiritualists is embracing, just as Elaine was talking about, embracing and looking at every philosophy and taking from that the understanding that suits us.
I'm quite sort of into that, because in the meditation I'm very lucky to have the Pope Peace
Lovely.
me and I have a token.
Beautiful. And nobody's going to catch you for that. But you know what's interesting, you know, when people talk about the other world in the spirit, if you think about it, look at the guides and the helpers that people have. Are they just spiritualists that come back? No, every tradition, every belief, every faith, every understanding comes and works with the people here. It's not isolated to just spiritualists. It's lovely, you know, exactly. And it's lovely when we connect with, you know, we have an understanding that says, you know, the spirit lives on, and we don't just say to you, well, just believe me, I'm a medium, I know. We bring the evidence, as Lawrence is going to talk about later, to say, and here's the proof that proves it to be so. You know, when Stephen talks a bit later, I was here a couple of years ago when he did a marvellous talk and said, you know, loads of people turn around and say, oh, well, it's all nonsense, science proves it so. Well, science has never disproved the divine and never disproved spirit. You know, it never has. But we search, we question. And so, again, taking from any tradition and incorporating that into our belief is important. We mustn't just become very narrow-minded in our experience of saying, oh, well, we know. But actually, when you look, you know, Elaine talked about the Druids. A lot of traditions in the world were oral traditions. They were passed down through stories. There weren't writings. It was passed from generation to generation. In a way, our modern spiritualism is the same. Lots of people who sat in circles would talk. would talk about their experiences. People would get together and in the churches and in home circles and talk about their experiences. It wasn't always written down. So actually we become the living history as well of our movement. Very much so. Lovely, thank you. That's a beautiful question. Anyone else? Jim? Yes.
I've been reading a lot of books lately,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them was about signs.
Yes.
Signs of healing, of faith,
Yeah.
a warning. Do you find that in your work as a medium, signs are very important to you?
I think so. I think we don't always notice signs, or we don't always pay attention to something that we become aware of. I think what I found interesting all the way through the COVID times was, and I've talked to Lawrence about this, you know, when it all started, and I'd be watching something on the news, and all of a sudden I would hear a voice say something very different to what was being presented, and I went, oh, that's really interesting. That then proved to be true. So giving me certain levels of warnings about different things. And I think that sometimes we go, oh, that's strange, and we almost dismiss that strangeness and think, oh, that's not, you know, oh, that's just a coincidence, or that's odd. And we ignore the message. We ignore paying attention to those signs that come. How many times do we ignore a gut feeling about something and then afterwards go, oh, for heaven's sakes? Because our own spirit is often trying to communicate with us. Our own spirit is trying to tell us something. And, you know, and often as an individual, we don't always listen within to that still small voice. You know, when we have students that want to develop mediumship, we say, you know, you're wanting to talk to all these people over there, these dead people. I said, then you're not talking to the people around you, and least of all, half the time you're not talking to the voice within. You're not learning to listen here. Because actually you're a spirit embodied, clothed in flesh. You have that connection and that ability to know. Do you realise that, ladies and gentlemen? You are godlike in your nature. Do you know that? Do you believe that, though? Do you really honestly know that with all things, like that gentleman was saying about the Native American, everything's interconnected? How many times, for those of you with like family members in different parts of the world, have you thought, oh my God, I've got to ring. I need to ring. They're on my mind. I need to ring them. And you ring them and they say, oh, thank God you've rung. What's happening is that power that reaches out, you know, a bit like when we hear the Star Wars, there's a disturbance in the Force. It's that same. We pick up on that vibration and we see things and we feel things. And, you know, sometimes there's a little bit of a misunderstanding in our movement. And, you know, you hear people say, that, oh, we're not here to predict. Actually, the spirit world have a view, a greater view than maybe we have. People like Gordon Higginson in the trance state would predict world happenings before they occurred. Every new year he'd do, the spirit world would come through and speak. The amount of times that people have been given information way in advance of something occurring, of something happening, and have changed. Look at the amount of people that never got on the Titanic. There were a lot through one way or another, and some just said, I didn't feel right about going. Had they got that sign, had they that feeling?
I had an aunt, great aunt, or great aunt rather, and she had her kids with her, and then walking up, they were second class passengers, so he walked up a gangplank, and she got on, stepped onto the boat, and stepped back off and said, come on children, we're going, and they never went.
Amazing. And did she ever attribute to what that was that changed her mind?
It was her funny ways.
See? When we talk about those people in the family, we always used to go and tell and go, you're a witch, you are. Why do you know these things? But, you know, people that respond to that, you know, so when you notice something, when you notice something that stands out, or a little alarm bell rings, or you get that little, almost like the voice on your shoulder. I mean, for me, because of working with the trance states, I hear sometimes what I call whispers. And sometimes I go, oh, that's interesting. I wonder where that's going to crop up, or what's going to happen. It's not always that it's something you can express to someone else, that warning, necessarily. But there are other things. I was with I'll give you an example of this. When I was talking to a friend 4 years ago, and she said, I'm getting involved with these people in a business. And I said, are you sure you want to get involved in it? And I just got alarm bells. 4 years later, they've dropped her and caused untold havoc. And not going in and doing the I told you so dance, because it's not the nature. But I said, 4 years ago, I said to you, are you sure this is the right thing for you to do? And I said, but onwards and upwards from here. You know, so sometimes we can get warnings for other people. Doesn't mean they'll listen. Doesn't mean, so this is where sometimes in the personal responsibility of our movement, you know, you can tell someone, you can warn someone, but if they've got to experience it, live it, and go through it, they've got to, and that's sometimes hard. This is where the oracle, Cassandra, cursed to have prophecies but never be believed. And that still happens within our movement today. People see and hear things and are not believed still, thousands of years later. So, you know, it's going back into our lovely ancient history. But again, if we learn to listen, to trust, when we see something, feel something, respond to it, we'll take those signs on board, and hopefully we'll make the right decisions and the right choices on that pathway. Thank you, Jim. Bless you. Sue.
We listen to survival evidence and that from our loved ones and friends, etc., but we also listen to our spirit guides and helpers. Do you feel there's more scope in spiritualism to listen to nature speak to us as well? Because I feel that's a big area where
Sure.
we don't really utilise that perhaps as much as we could do, and I
Yeah.
feel there's room for that to open
I think
up more.
I think not for everyone, but a lot of people have lost that touch with nature. I mean, if you think about, if we go back a generation or two, everybody would be out doing something with the land, even, you know, if they're doing their allotments or whatever. There's a much more closer harmony to nature. And as we've gone on, we've become more technological based, and look at how nature suffers. I mean, when you go back and you look, and unfortunately one of the areas when we go back, especially to the early days of spiritualism, there was a lot of interest in nature and the Devic kingdom and things, and unfortunately it led to one of the biggest hoaxes in spiritualism, which was the fairies, the Cotton fairies, which little girls faked photos of fairies, and scientists and even people like Arthur Conan Doyle absolutely wholeheartedly believed in, because maybe we wanted to believe a little too much that everything was possible. But when you, for instance, go out into nature, when you've been deprived of it for a while, how does it make you feel? Oh, you know, look at the green park out there, how lovely it is. To go and sit and to touch, everything has a soul. Even the speck of dust under your feet has an element of the divine in it. And you know, and again, we're looking out there all the time, where this is where we're living. This is what we're around. And to sit and actually tune into the power of the divine in nature, that every living thing is part of that power. God of the granite and the rose, soul of the sparrow and the bee. That power and energy flows through everything. But again, we don't spend enough time on it. Modern, have to be careful, not use broad brush, but a lot in modern spiritualism falls on this communication, but not always the broader brushstroke of all life, of all experience, of all energy and power. And I think there is a lot to be said to go and sit in nature and to be aware, again, a bit like the Andrew Jackson Davies quote, the breath of life flowing across me, something has begun, this change in this power. And you know, we do need to sit more with nature, we do need to look at it more, especially in the situation and the circumstance that we're in. But of course we're ignoring that, and we're thinking of the technology, the houses, the homes, the people. Whereas if we actually started to listen to nature, maybe we'll find some unpleasant truths about where we're at and what we're doing, not only to the planet but to ourselves, by the technology and the advances that we have within us. Oh, second question, go on.
It's not a question. I'd just like to pay homage to a snail that I saw once climbing up my French window where I live somewhere else. And suddenly I became aware of the light within this snail. And that touched some same within myself and absolutely everything else.
Yeah.
And that was really one of
Oneness.
those key moments.
Mm.
I just wanted to mention
The beauty
it
of
because
oneness.
it's like, thank you for showing me that,
Yes.
revealing that to me.
Yeah. And I think, you know, that connection to animals, to nature, how many people do we meet that says they'd rather trust animals than people? Because there's an openness, there's an honesty, but there's also that connection. You know, we may not speak the same physical language, but on a spiritual level, we all communicate. And again, animal communication is another part that, you know, although is taught by some mediums, other mediums will go, ah, nonsense. But yet, there is a power and a light and a spirit and a soul there that has an understanding. Lovely, bless you, Saint. Anyone else before we have our break?
Mark,
Yes.
do you believe that it's a case of seeing is believing?
Well, if you see, you see. However, sometimes the feeling, we were having a little discussion at the back about phenomena of spiritualism. And, you know, I've had experiences over the years, as all the speakers have, and they'll tell you about their individual experiences, where there is stuff that becomes undeniable in phenomena. And there is stuff that becomes undeniable in different ways, not necessarily just physical mediumship and materialization of spirit, which I've sat in a few seances where I've seen remarkable things, and I've just felt so privileged to have had the chance, because it's you know, rarer in many respects nowadays. Not, I think, because there's an end of that phenomena. I don't think people are willing to sit long enough for things. Everybody wants things yesterday. But when you can see something, I saw a wonderful transfiguration medium called Diane Elliott, who was a student of the great Queenie Nixon, who was renowned for transfiguration. And I saw a lady who was only 5 foot high change physically into the size of a 6'4" trucker. Her hands turned into these massive shovel-like hands. Her face puffed out, curly hair appeared, and it was this woman's husband. And it was remarkable. And during this demonstration, more and more, this face and body changed. It was absolutely remarkable. And towards the end of the demonstration, she changed into this very craggy-faced Native American gentleman with this plait of hair, very old and wizened, very wise-looking face. And this figure looked towards where I was sitting and said hello, and I nudged this woman next to me and I went, say hello, he's talking to you. And she went, hello, and he didn't respond. And he said, hello again. And so I nudged the woman on the other side and I went, he must be talking to you. And this was one of my circle members that was sat next to me, and she went, hello. And there was no response. And he said, are you not going to talk to me? And I said, who, me? Oh. And it was one of my guides. And he said, and here's what you wouldn't allow us to say at the circle on Tuesday, and then continued the message that had been halted during a trance session on the Tuesday. That to me was remarkable proof. And the fact I was seeing someone I'd only felt within here sat in front of me as clear as I see you now. So those kind of seeing is believing is wonderful and miraculous if you get the chance to see that phenomena. But I think our platforms here allow us to be able to see not just the phenomena of evidence of survival communication, but of healing, but also to see and understand the wisdom as well. You know, because it's not just about, you know, I believe. Once you believe, what then? It's no use just going, well, I've had a message from Nan, I'm going home and watching Corrie now, that was great. But how many do? How many do? Just brush it away. Whereas actually, you've just had proof to you that not only you cannot die, but you are a living, deathless spirit. What does that mean? Where does that go? What are you going to do with it now? And that's where our movement, and days like today, and the Lyceum services, and all sorts of things that Lawrence has been doing here at Poole, gives people a greater chance to see more of what the spirit world is capable of, not just the very thin vision of evidence of survival. There is so much more to who and what we are. There is so much more to what a church is than just a demonstration. It's the community of people. Very briefly, I think, because otherwise I'll get in trouble.
I just want to say that years ago, because it was pretty normal to me to see spirits and that, I used to not understand why it was so important for survival evidence, because it just was. It took a friend to say to me about how much comfort it can bring,
Yeah.
how much healing it can bring, and that was very humbling when she actually explained that, because it made that much more sense. And I think that's something else that, sometimes people could appreciate perhaps a little bit
Yes.
more. It's not, like you say, or quick message and then off to
Yeah.
watch the soaps.
It's for so many people, it can be life transforming, not just in how we deal with death and grieving, but also in recognizing and starting to understand more of life. We talk about the philosophy of spiritualism, but actually that is an ever encompassing and ever growing area, because life is ever growing, evolving and changing. And again, we can't just say, well, as spiritualists we have all this correct. We have to look across all the philosophies and all the understanding and realise that it can be life transforming. But one of the things that has to happen is that nothing's ever just served up onto us on a plate and that's it, we don't have to do anything. We all have to put in the work to transform self. Once we know we've got this, what are you going to do with it? Where are you going to take it? How is the other world? We've often had this discussion, haven't we? There's a great difference between I want and what the other world wants. And it depends on, are you just going to serve self or serve spirit? Or do a mixture of both? But there's a lot of people who, when you start to talk to them about what spirit want, oh, I'm not interested in that. Haven't we had that conversation before? I'm not interested in that. I only want this.
No.
Now, spirit world aren't going to chastise you for that, to be honest with you. You do, it's your life, you do what you want. But imagine what this changes in the lives of others and in you. The lives that you may touch. But if you only touch one person, if you only transform one person's spirit or soul, you've done your job. So, if we're able to help more and touch more people, like this all going online that Lawrence has dedicated his life to in the last couple of years, it's touched lives, it's transformed. Technology, you see? We may talk about nature, but technology has made us reach out further, the ability to reach out, the ability to connect. So we have to embrace all of life and all technology, because spirit does as well. Spirit does as well.
Brilliant.
You're welcome.
So you get the idea of how today's going to work. So thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Simon.
Thank you, Elaine.
And thank you, Elaine. We're going to have a short break now and resume again at 12 o'clock, where we have Brian will be talking about healing within spiritualism, and that will be chaired by Ian. And that was me telling Ian that he's going to be chairing it there. So, you shouldn't have put a shirt on.
Right though about the stillness. So I started in the circle in Spain. Back in we used to do and transformations there. What you're seeing